Welcome everybody to this talk about agroforestry and pollination and the opportunities that both of that present for cocoa production on a global scale. My name is Thomas Jericho-Wanger and I'm an associate professor at Westlake University in China. I'm also affiliated with the University of Göttingen in Germany, and I'm one of the initiators of the Global Agroforestry Network. Climate change is impacting cocoa production substantially. And in particular, El Niño drought events have been shown to reduce cocoa yields. Experimentally, this could be shown in Indonesia, the third largest cocoa producing country in the world. Maximum dry temperatures are predicted to severely affect the cocoa belt in West Africa, which is shown here on the figure on the right-hand side. Particularly see the cocoa production areas and the suitability of these areas for production. By 2050, compared to the current day, suitability has significantly been reduced. At the bottom panel, you see that the change for suitability, so the areas that are no longer suitable for cocoa production, have been reduced by almost 80%. So that requires an urgent need for cocoa production systems to be more resilient towards climate change impacts and droughts in particular. In general, diversified agricultural systems have been shown to positively overall affect ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, climate regulation, water regulation, but also services such as pollination or biological pest control. Diversification has also led to mainly positive effects on crop yields and biodiversity overall. Now, in terms of cocoa production, diversifying monocultures into agroforestry systems have been suggested to be a viable solution to mitigate climate impacts and to make these whole systems more resilient toward climate change. In previous work from Indonesian cocoa landscapes, my colleagues and I have shown that it is possible in agroforestry systems to increase cocoa yields and at the same time maintain biodiversity of multiple taxonomic groups. So on the graph here on the left-hand side, you see for tree diversity all the way down to amphibian and reptile diversity that species richness can be maintained while increasing crop yields. However, this is only possible if the shade level of agroforestry systems does not drop below 40%. On the right-hand side, you see the results partly of a global meta-analysis showing that, for instance, the maximum temperature of agroforestry systems is lower compared to monocultures, similar to the mean temperature. Overall, and that's actually a critical part when we compare agroforestry systems to monocultures, the cocoa yields are lower in agroforestry systems compared to monocultures. However, in terms of carbon sequestration, agroforestry systems can sequester much more carbon compared to monocultures. So to sum this up, agroforestry systems provide important opportunities, not just for biodiversity conservation, but also for climate resilience. But one critical aspect is that larger yield gaps remain in agroforestry systems compared to monocultures. Cocoa is a pollination limited crop. So that means that the overall maximum yield can only be achieved if pollination is not a limiting factor in the production process. Because of that, we looked into cocoa pollination, both in terms of manual pollination, so using our hands to pollinate the flowers, and also insects as natural pollinator agents. So what we found is for manual pollination enhancements, and that's what you can see on the graph on the left-hand side, is that if we increase the manual pollination rate of trees from 0 to 100%, the yield increases can go up to 160% versus the income increases of farmers can be up to 100%. For natural pollination, it is a little bit unknown what these natural pollinators are, and it is also not so well known which strategies to pursue on a landscape and farm level to manage pollinator positive. So that means that natural pollination and the abundance of these pollinators can be maintained in cocoa pollination landscapes. After talking about the relevance of cocoa agroforestry systems for the future of cocoa production and introducing cocoa pollination as a potential way to bridge the yield gap, the higher yield gap in agroforestry systems compared to monocultures, I would like to introduce you to the Global Agroforestry Network, which is a new initiative that I co-initiated last year to look into interesting applied and pressing questions on cocoa, coffee, and rubber agroforestry. This is an initiative that is done in collaboration with colleagues from all these institutions that you see at the bottom of the slide here. And we've done a couple of very interesting projects that I would like to introduce to you next. The first project I want to talk about is our global cocoa pollination project. And herein we're looking into understanding the benefits that cocoa pollination can provide, not only for the environment, but also for the millions of smallholder farmers that we see in all the global production areas. So the benefit of the Global Agroforestry Network is that we have the site network in different countries across all continents, basically. And specifically for this project, we are working on sites in Brazil, Cameroon, Ghana, and Indonesia. And we're using manual pollination to understand the variability between different countries, but also we're using automated monitoring devices that are currently developed in my group at Westlake University to better understand natural pollination and the ecology of natural pollinators. So this project is coordinated by Dr. Manuel Toledo Hernandez, a postdoc also in my group, and we did a bit of outreach for this project already, so you could find that on Monga Bay. I gave a talk at the European Cocoa Association earlier this year, and we've represented that project also at various conferences so far. The second project I want to talk about is the global mapping initiative of cocoa and coffee agroforestry on a global scale to understand the restoration potential of these diversified systems. So we use basically more than 50,000 sites from the Global Agroforestry Network, and in collaboration with Professor Tom Crowther at ETH Zurich, we use random forest approaches, so machine learning techniques to predict which areas of degraded land are suitable for restoration with cocoa agroforestry systems. So here, this is a project that also requires collaboration from the agroforestry community. So if you would like to contribute to that project, co-author publications, and make a difference for the global mapping of these systems, please do feel free to get in touch. So the take-home message from this talk is basically, yes, cocoa agroforestry and also cocoa pollination are critical for the persistence of cocoa production being resilient to climate change impacts that I pointed out in the beginning of this talk. I think we need to carefully think about cocoa designer landscapes and the role that agroforestry systems can play when we redesign how we want to farm cocoa, how we can transition from monocultures to agroforestry systems, and how we can use pollination best to bridge the yield gaps that we are seeing as part of that transition. There are important research gaps in pollination research. So basically, when we look at natural pollinators in particular, we need to understand what are the best management practices in cocoa systems so that we can maintain and potentially enhance natural pollination. Overall, it is critical to facilitate multi-stakeholder collaborations, because without collaborations of researchers, governments, and industry players and the farmers at the very center of it, we will not be able to meet these key challenges that are coming up, not just for cocoa production, but also on a much more broader scale for agriculture in general. So I also want to stress here, please consider collaborating with us as the Global Agroforestry Network in this global mapping initiative that I pointed out initially. If you do have sites available, you have polygons and a GIS layer, please consider sharing that with us because it will help us to refine our prediction methods. And also we are currently in the process of coming up with a new definition or kind of a more general definition for cocoa agroforestry. So if you would like to be involved in this, I would also be very glad to hear from you in that sense. So thank you very much for listening and hopefully for collaborating. So please do feel free to get in touch. On this slide, you can find my email, the web address of the lab, also the Twitter account, and here's the QR code for LinkedIn so that we can stay connected. So thanks again and hopefully talk to you soon.